Welcome to World Builders Anonymous. Kick that world building addiction and actually finish that novel with your hosts Vito and John.
Nobody wants to hear your slurping, John.
Did you say something? I wasn't listening.
No, nothing at all. Nothing
Cool.
at all.
We should probably start the podcast then.
Yes, I think that's the cue. Oh, boy. Welcome to the podcast, everyone.
Hello and welcome.
Hello and welcome. I have a janky setup today for my microphone. I hope it's not full of bumps and just kind of clanks and that kind of thing. But I'm just kind of leaning on the bed here, and the microphone's precariously perched atop its mount. Not in its mount, atop its mount.
Because that would only make too much sense.
Well, yeah, I don't have all the parts for it out right now, and I can't be bothered to dig through my suitcases to grab them. But
You lazy
it'll
fool.
be a couple more weeks of this, and then I'll have my full-time setup once again, instead of this improvised slapdash atrocity.
Well, shortly thereafter, what is currently the office / baby room will become a full-time baby room.
Oh, no.
And I will no longer have a desk. So I'll have to find a new home for my recording setup.
Or just keep it in there and, just do the podcast with Andy.
Yeah, we'll just have random interjections of like horrifying screaming. I'm just like, we'll cut that out in post.
Hold on, I gotta change a diaper real quick. Just
Hold on.
Shouting at the microphone.
No, it would go really well.
And since
It would
I'm the
go
editor,
really well.
that would be a lot of fun for me. Okay.
Have fun with that. No,
Yeah, anyway.
I'll probably just like post up in the living room or something, and you'll have to deal with Alaska making random noises sometimes.
Okay, that sounds good.
Alaska being the dog, not my child.
Well, she's pretty much your child at this point.
She's mostly human.
How does Alaska feel about the new baby? Does she know? Is she freaking out? Is she just kind of fine with it?
Well, to be clear, the baby's not born yet.
I know.
Which you know, but I want to clarify that. I don't think she knows anything. I think she's going to be shocked because she's a dog after all, and the concept of pregnancy is lost on her.
Never,
especially considering that she has no uterus. So she's very confused, and will be more confused as time goes on. That's my prediction.
Fair enough. Well,
We're gonna come home with the Andy from the hospital, and Alaska's just gonna go like, "Oh yeah, that's about what I thought would happen." Oh, that makes sense.
Cool. Okay, well, let's just get back to
business as usual.
Yeah, get back to business. Okay, cool.
Now, there's a tiny human who cries a lot. Cool.
And who
Can
likes
I
to grab my whiskers.
Can I eat it? Can I eat baby? No, you cannot eat baby.
Anyway.
Anyway,
Tangents all over the place. Tangents abound. That should be another T-shirt. Just gonna have a lot of abounding T-shirts.
That's a very authorly word.
Abound.
Yeah. It's a good word for a T-shirt
Maybe
line.
it's too authorly a word.
I don't follow.
It's just like it's one of those words you use when you try to sound authorly.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Oh yes, my vocabulary is much larger than yours.
My vocabulary abounds.
My vocabulary is supercalculus.
What?
That's a
I
word.
thought you were just going to say superb. But that
that's
would have been too normal, I
Probably
suppose.
what I should have said, but
Anyway,
everyone
second
knows
tangent
if you're
aside,
writing fantasy, you got to make up some fancy words so that everyone knows. You could create your own language if you decided to bother to take the time to do it.
character walks into room, sees dog, says, "Oh, is that a dog?" And other character says, "No, it's a sklerbluffloff." Don't you know? They're so common in this world. That's what we have instead of dogs. They look and sound just like dogs, but they have a crazy name that you've never heard before.
Yeah. And it's like so obvious by the way you describe it. It's like, no, it's just a dog, or no, it's just a
It's
dragon,
a furry four-legged creature with an elongated snout and very good sense of smell and hearing. Oh, you mean a dog?
Right.
No.
Because obviously all these characters aren't speaking English, because the odds of English evolving the same way it did here on Earth are about 1 in infinity. So you're using words that don't exist in this world anyway to describe it to the reader. So you might as well use words for animals that they're familiar with anyway, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like making up your own political structures instead of just saying it's like a capitalist
republic.
society. Like, you just say the things that we understand in some cases, because I don't want you to explain capitalism to me just when you could say capitalism.
Or whatever.
I hate
yeah.
you.
Like, yeah, don't make up words for familiar things just to sound original unless you're actually creating something new. Yeah, maybe that's a good
Right.
rule of
If
thumb.
you're writing sci-fi and have this cool, unique weapon that doesn't exist, like a vibro knife from, like, in Star Wars, you have to describe what it is and give it its own name because it doesn't exist otherwise. But if it's a dog, it's a freaking dog.
Although I think it also applies to that, because if you're creating something new for your sci-fi universe and it's basically a vibro knife, it's a knife with a vibrating blade, then just call it a vibro knife. That's a nice
Well,
name
I
for
meant
that thing.
treating the vibro knife as if it was the first time it was being come up with.
Yes,
in Star
right,
Wars.
Yeah. Anyway,
Quite.
Yeah. Anyway, we are going to talk a little bit about sci-fi today, actually, because I am sort of transitioning to a sci-fi story that I've had an idea for a long time, and that's actually where my origins are more than with fantasy, honestly, because I come from, well, it's kind of a mix of both, because as some people might know from listening already, I read mostly Star Wars novels growing up, which some of which are great, some of which are not so great. And I read a lot of other things too, especially as I got a little bit older. But from the time I was probably 11 or 12, maybe a little older than that, I can't really remember. That was like the primary thing I would look forward to reading whenever the new ones came out. Like, if anyone's familiar with the New Jedi Order series and all that kind of stuff, all of which is non-canon anymore, but that's what I lived and breathed in terms of the fiction I was consuming and really enthusiastic about consuming. And of course, Star Wars is very much a mixture of sci-fi and fantasy elements. It's by no means hard sci-fi or anything like that, and that's not really what I want to create myself either. So yeah, last week I talked about this idea I had for a series of stories that take place on a world ship of some sort, this colony ship that's hurtling through the stars towards some distant planet that we're hoping is habitable. We don't really know for sure because it's very hard to tell these things from long distance. Even, like, I was doing a lot of research back in the day on different exoplanets in real life that I could maybe base the story on that they're heading towards and how far away they are, how we know they might be habitable, that kind of stuff. And opinions are always changing on whether or not they're in the habitable zone around their star. What kind of star is it? How likely is it that they're tidally locked and all this kind of stuff? And eventually I was like, okay.
let's give this up.
Okay, let's calm down. This is the whole point of the podcast, right? The world building was getting way too intense and distracting me from any thought of the story itself or the characters, the actual important parts of, a story. So I just decided to throw the whole thing away for a while and walk away from it because I was just getting too involved with all those elements. So now I'm thinking either I'll set it in a separate universe or galaxy or whatever, kind of like Star Wars, a long time ago, get in a galaxy far, far away, with humans, of course.
So original.
So original.
So original.
Yeah, all that kind of thing. Or I'll just kind of play fast and loose with physics and, that kind of thing. What I'm thinking, and as many of you who read softer sci-fi know, you can get around a lot of things with advances in technology, whether they're, believable or not from our current perspective.
Yeah.
Like anti-gravity machinery. Or...
Sure, that was the one I was going to give it as an example. Like, we've accepted that if you're writing hard, like even any kind of sci-fi really, we're accepting that we've discovered anti-gravity technology so that you're not flying around in your spaceship. Like, we've established that and we've understood it and we can accept it without you explaining to us how it works or
maybe not.
On.
There's different ways you can go. Like, you could have no anti-gravity, but you could have some sort of warp mechanism where you can zap between points faster than light speed and that kind of stuff. But maybe we haven't discovered the secret of gravity yet or something like that.
I don't know.
You can kind of pick and choose to fit your story, basically.
There are certainly, though, in sci-fi, I'm not well-versed in sci-fi, not the most by any means, but there seem to be certain technologies and certain conventions that when you read sci-fi, you're willing to accept that these exist and you don't need it explained or explained away at all. Just anti-gravity exists and we know how to use it and it's in every ship and that's good enough. Like, we don't need to go into that.
It becomes essentially magic. For the purposes of a story, especially coming from a fantasy sort of background, maybe think of it more that way than as technology.
Yeah. Well, and I would argue that taking the time to explain anti-gravity in almost all cases is a mistake if you're writing this kind of genre. Like, I do not care why or how the anti-gravity works or how your laser gun works. I'm reading sci-fi. I get that there are laser guns. I don't need you to tell me anything about this. Let's just get along with the story.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, it's important to recognize, too, that that's for a specific audience, though, too. Like, there are people who love the hard sci-fi and the technical details and, like, oh, man, how did they get this fusion reactor to be so tiny that they could use it on this spaceship and all this kind of stuff. And, oh, maybe that's a clever sort of theoretical way that they could do that. Oh, interesting.
I'm a writer, not a nuclear physicist.
Exactly, yeah. But it's interesting how many, like, technological advances have actually, like, been either anticipated or even inspired by science fiction sort of postulates of what future technology might be from people who actually understood a lot of times, authors who actually understood a lot of times how that sort of thing might theoretically work. But that's not me. I'm not a scientist at all.
I remember watching Star Trek. Our dad is a big Star Trek fan, and that's putting it
and so are we.
It's putting it somewhat lightly. But I remember watching Star Trek and seeing they had these like food replicators or whatever they're called. Like you just say, I want a cheeseburger with fries, and cheeseburger with fries just kind of appears and you can eat it. And I remember thinking, like, why don't we have that? Why is that not what we do? That seems like it's so much better.
Right, yeah. And it's of course explained somewhere, somehow, in even if it's kind of BS sort of terms, but they have an explanation for like, oh, well, it takes the matter from this sort of thing and reorganizes it into a new form and all this kind of thing.
Like it explains a concept that sounds like it would work, but we just have no way to actually do it.
Yeah, and they even do that for Star Wars. Like if you ever look at the like cross-section books of like, show like half of the lightsaber, and like, oh, this is where the focusing crystal goes, and oh, this is where
my favorite thing growing up, one of them was the Star Wars guide to vehicles and vessels.
Oh yes,
and it like had all the different parts in the vehicles and all the spaceships and stuff, and gave you all these technical details about their construction and all that kind of stuff. And obviously, none of it was anywhere close to some kind of reality, but it was super cool, and I enjoyed that. I wouldn't want that in a novel, though.
Yeah, and that's kind of the part of the reason I think this idea is going to work well for me. Again, sort of on the world building topic, because if I was going to create this entire universe a la Star Wars or Star Trek, I would have to create something like, the Incom Corporation created the X-Wing starfighter based on plans designed by such and such back in the 10 years ago, that kind of stuff. It's just going to be so distracting, but that's the kind of thing I would want to set up in my world if I were going to go to those lengths and have a story that broad in terms of its setting. But because it's all taking place on one colony ship, probably I'm thinking so far some sort of ring or Bernal sphere or something like that.
Like in a Halo kind of way?
It's kind of like a Halo thing, but also not. It looks more like a spaceship than Halo, the Halo in Halo. But it operates on similar principle of centrifugal something force.
I'm not going to help you. I just want to see you struggle.
I believe it's centrifugal force, keeping you basically rooted to the ground, kind of like gravity would, artificial gravity that way, kind of. But all we're following is this one ship that's hurtling through space, and there's no aliens. There's no, there's some advanced technology from our perspective, but no faster than light travel, no artificial gravity, nothing like that. So I don't need to create a whole bunch of stuff in order to create this universe. Basically, all I need is. And I was thinking about this a lot as I was researching this week, and also I started listening to a new book by Robert Heinlein, who's a very famous sci-fi author from, I believe, 30s onwards to like the 70s or 80s, I can't remember. But he wrote several really famous books, including Starship Troopers, Stranger in a Strange Land, The Moon is a... so the one I'm listening to is The Moon is a Harsh Mistress or something like that.
You struggled with this earlier.
I know I did. I didn't look it up. Of
Here,
course
I got you.
On the Audible page. In fact, I'm pulling it up right now. It's called, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. There we go. That's what it's called. It's quite good so far. But I was thinking to myself, the book starts out very... it's just this one guy basically who it's following, this Russian computer technician on this lunar station, and he's talking to this supercomputer artificial intelligence in the first chapter. And actually this really fun scene where the computer's like experimenting with humor. Like he paid one of the janitors, because he's in charge of the systems aboard this station on the moon or something. He paid one of the janitors like $1 million billion or something like that, just as a joke. and the authorities were like, can you go check on the computer? He's being silly again. And so the guy goes down and talks to the computer, and the computer just thought it was funny. And he's talking to him about, okay, there's two kinds of jokes. There's the ones that are, funny, and then they keep being funny. But then there's also the ones that are funny one time, and then if you do it again, it's not funny anymore.
It's not funny anymore.
Yeah, so it was this fun scene of them trying to explain humor to the computer. But anyway, it just reminded me that it doesn't matter how the computer works. It doesn't matter how any of this works. It's just this guy and his relationship to this other character who happens to be a computer in this world, but it's no different than, I don't know, an elf or I don't know, an alien or something like that. It doesn't matter if it's a computer or not, as long as you can connect to it. Although you could use, I don't know, some of our implicit biases against sort of thinking of machines as being alive in some sort of story aspect, but in that scene it doesn't matter.
Sure, and that actually, I think, that example serves a dual purpose. Going back to fantasy, regarding why you don't need to take extraordinary measures right off the bat to explain all the intricacies of what makes an elf, just as you don't have to explain the way the computer works. You can let the scene stand for itself, and you can infer things about these different types of beings through the scene, not through your exposition.
Right, and the most important aspect of any character is not what they look like or even sort of
what they are.
It's how they act and how they respond to different things that happen to them in the story, and how you relate to them in those ways. So I was thinking a lot about that, because up until this point, I've had just these huge ideas for this story series taking place on this world ship. There's like, political takeovers and like revolts, and maybe this separatist group who doesn't believe that they're actually in space. They think they're actually part of some giant experiment, and they're going to threaten to blow up the station unless the outsiders let them off or something like that. And then maybe there's this part where they're in the middle of their voyage, in the very middle, in like 500, maybe 1,000 years in, and they still have 500, maybe 1,000 years to go. And what is the meaning of life in that situation when you're one of those people alive in that period of time where you're like, well, what am I even here for, other than to just kind of prolong our existence until somebody else eventually gets to do the thing that we're all here to do, and kind of examine that question a little bit. And then maybe when they get to their planet, like I mentioned last week, they discover that it's not actually habitable, and the letdown that is, and they have to set off on another long journey somewhere else. All that kind of stuff. These big concepts. Very Brandon Sanderson-ish.
Yeah.
But I hadn't really devoted much time to thinking about who these people are that I want to tell their stories. So I've been thinking about that a lot more in the last few days, rather than the events that I want to take place. And so that's actually led me more towards maybe writing the middle section first, the section where not much is happening. We're kind of in the doldrums of the middle part of the journey. People are just kind of trying to go about their lives and do their thing, and trying to find some sort of meaning in the middle of it. And where does that come from? How do they do that? And it would then resemble a lot of other stories, just kind of
with this backdrop of the world ship.
Yeah, and I don't want to say
hurtling through
mundane,
space,
because we're all essentially on a world ship hurtling through space, right?
Sure.
And what is the Earth but a giant version of that? And we all have to deal with those same questions, and it's kind of an interesting microcosm to examine that in. So I've been playing a lot with that idea and who the people are, whose stories I want to tell this week. So yeah, made some progress with that, and I'm really getting excited about that concept a lot more. I still want to go back to my old idea with the divers and magic and all that kind of stuff, but for now, I think I'm on this track pretty solidly.
And I think another question to ask is, and it'll inform a lot about the way you tell the story, is like, what kind of story do you want to tell? Like, if you have the world ship serves as this backdrop that lets you kind of do anything you want. And you have your characters that you want, but you also need to know what kind of story you want to tell in the first place. Like what are you wanting this to be in general?
Right, yeah, and it's different for different stories. I can examine a lot of different themes through the lens of this ship and the experiences it has, because it very much parallels Earth, the Earth we live on in a lot of ways. And it's big enough to where not everyone knows each other. There's probably a good 50,000 at least people that live on it. And there's systems of government. There could be artificial intelligence overlords. There could be all kinds of interesting things that go on throughout the history of this ship that it's almost too broad. I need to narrow down like a few different instances that I want to zoom in on first, and then I'm sure I can sort of build the rest of the pieces off of those sort of foundational elements, I guess. And there's a lot of different types of stories I can tell, like you said, and I need to zero in on what that first one is. And like I was saying, I think I'm finding the middle bit of the journey a little bit more interesting right now, because it's not one of those fireworks displays plot-wise. It's more of a character-focused study than anything else.
And you can, once you kind of know the characters you want, you can even switch tack to make it that bigger thing with those characters that you found that you want to tell and that you've become interested in yourself. Yeah,
maybe in the course of writing it, I'll decide maybe part of the meaning they find is simply, not simply, but sort of the prolongation of the existence of the people on the ship, the population, and sort of their contribution to the overall goal, which is to colonize this other planet. And maybe they have this opportunity to save the ship from some sort of calamity in the middle of their sort of... But maybe not. Maybe that's kind of taking the easy way out and sort of saying that your meaning is completely connected to what you do in your life, which is not, I don't think, 100% true. I think it's, a little more complicated than that. So I don't know how to tackle all those big questions yet. Maybe I'll figure that out.
It is interesting how many questions come up with it, though. How deep that ends up being when you just start with that concept.
And you have to be really careful, like what you're saying through what you're writing. Maybe you're unintentionally leading the reader down a philosophical road you didn't even intend to, because you made a certain story decision, and you have to be really intentional about that, I think. At least from my perspective right now, it seems that way. So yeah, it's an interesting thing to kind of contemplate at this stage, since it's much more tied to that than my previous idea was. The previous idea was more like fun adventure, and there's elements of that in these stories as well, especially some of the ideas I have, but there's also much more of a I'm trying to say something with this story kind of thing at play here.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a lot of interesting thoughts about this week.
A lot to parse through and wrap your mind around, for sure.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I'm trying not to just default to going back to researching exoplanets, because it's easy. A lot easier than thinking about the deep philosophical implications of certain story decisions.
I usually advocate against this, but this might be an instance where it's beneficial for you to jump in and kind of do a writing exercise on, just jump into a random time on that ship and start just looking at it in a narrative lens and write like a short story of some kind about a day on this planet or the world ship for this person, and kind of get in the mindset of what you want that writing and that world to look like, and might help you kind of jumpstart the process.
Yeah, definitely. And I had done that a while back when I first had this idea for a couple short scenes that I wrote, and I went back over those. And I really liked what I wrote. I always love the feeling of when you go back and read something that you wrote a while ago that you forgot about. You're like, oh, this is pretty good.
This is actually okay.
And not great, of course, and there's things that I would change, but I really liked some of the ideas I had in those little scenes, just in terms of some of the cultural things I threw in there, just kind of off the cuff as I was thinking about it, and a couple of the characters and that kind of thing. And so I think I have a few ideas I want to get back to this week based on some of those scenes that I do want to do exactly that, and just kind of jump in and examine this world from a person's perspective. Probably one of the ones that I created for those.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, that's my week this week. I actually got some stuff done. Yay.
Look at you go. Unstoppable.
Also got my second class FAA medical as well. So that's some progress on my flight training stuff. You got to clap a lot slower than that. There you go. Slow clap. Woo!
Anyway, I didn't do much writing this week. It was a busy week, but also just kind of taking a short rest from some furious writing beforehand. But, and this is not the thing that's keeping me from writing, I am sort of formulating the next chapter in my brain and what I want that to look like exactly. But that's neither here nor there. What I did want to talk about was a character that I have that I don't quite know what to do with yet. Her name is Caratrice, but she goes by Triss. That's what she likes to be called.
Is it all one word?
Caratrice? Yes, it is.
Cool.
It starts with a K, if you're interested. But anyway, she is ultimately going to be the love interest for Darren, the main character of the book. But I don't want that to be all she is, obviously. That's kind of a thing that happens a lot in fantasy novels in particular. I think there's some... I guess you would call it fantasy, but it's a different kind of the word fantasy. Authors embark on in the way they write women, sometimes it's like, this is the love interest for Valen from Bloodsong, and her sole purpose in life is to be there for him to love. And then literally in the next book, she's just not there anymore because she didn't matter. All she was there was to give him some romantic tension, and she has no character or life of her own.
That actually happened a couple times in the Star Wars series that I used to read. There'd be a girl that Luke kind of had a thing for in the story, and then she's like, in the next series, of course there's different authors writing these series, so the next series would pick up and be like, wait, what? This is like 2 years later, and whatever happened to her? I was invested in that relationship. What happened?
They had a messy breakup. It wasn't pretty.
And they'll mention like, oh yeah, we kind of went our separate ways a while back, and it's the kind of thing. It's like, oh come on, I really liked her.
Yeah. So I don't want that to be Triss. I want her to be her own character. And that's always been the plan. Like, I never want a character to exist for something so one-dimensional as being a love interest.
Yeah, and that can happen to any character used for that purpose, whether they're male or female. Oftentimes, well, you're only thinking about your main character. You're not thinking of this other person as a person. You're just thinking of them in how they relate to that main character.
I'm trying to maintain the idea that every character in the world that I spend any kind of time on has lived a full life and is on a trajectory somewhere and for some reason. And they come in with that context even if the reader doesn't know it. And they need to act like that. They can't act like their only purpose in life is to fulfill the plot. They have to be doing their own thing or else they don't feel like real people. And so, with that in mind, I'm grappling with Triss. She's about 16 to 20, same age range as Darren is. I haven't honed in on exactly what I want that to be yet. But I don't know what direction I want to go with her. I don't want... Darren has just found his new home under the city docks with this little band of ruffians, and she is a fellow occupant of that under the dock space in that little colony they have established under there, and she's lived there for some time. And I don't know if I want her to be. I know I want her to be generally more competent at a lot of things than Darren is. One of the things about Darren's characters is he's not that competent and not that good at stuff because he's never had to do a lot of these things. And she has. She's been living this life in some form or another.
Is she a thief as well?
I'm thinking she's a thief as well. But there's a question there too, right? So I could go two ways with that. Either she's really good at thieving because she does it all the time, and it's kind of part of what she does. Or maybe she has some character tension with the people around her because for one reason or another, like her mother or whatever character you want to pick, doesn't want her to fall into this life of thieving, even though it's what she had to do. Her mother ultimately had to do in order to make ends meet a long time ago, and now she's here, but she wants Triss to go on to do bigger and better things than that. And so she doesn't want her to be involved in this life, but Triss sees all her friends and all the people she loves doing it, and she wants to be a part of it, and there's some character tension there.
Or maybe she needs to help support her mom in her old age or something, you know.
Yeah, there's a lot of different directions you can go, and they inform things about her character. And it's kind of a trope to have the whole
thief with the
female... No, not that. The female character who wants to do X but is told by society you shouldn't do X. Like, I don't know if I want to do that.
Adventure in the great white somewhere. Oh,
that was beautiful. Yeah, but exactly. Like I want more than this provincial life. Like it's the same thing.
Yeah,
in a different way.
That's why I sang it.
I get you. I'm following along.
Okay, good.
But at the same time, it's also a trope to have this super capable female character who overshadows the male, like your male lead. Like I don't know what direction exactly I want to go with it, and it does inform to an extent some of the events that take place in the next couple of chapters. I don't have a solid idea yet. I see pros and cons to both sides. Like I said, I do want her to be competent in a certain way. I toyed with the idea of her kind of being the more combat able person in the trio. Like there's a little trio I have planned with Darren, Warren, and Triss. And I kind of thought, if she's the one who's bigger than Warren, just because she's older, and she's more competent at fighting than Darren, because Darren's not good at fighting, it'd be interesting if she was kind of the protector of the group. But then I had to grapple with the idea that if they're in some kind of daring escape and the most combat competent of the trio has to fight off a city guard, there's a lot of contrivances that have to go into place to get a 16-year-old girl to, beat a city guard in combat.
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to jump that bridge.
And maybe you have a more scenario where they're trying to escape the Thieves Guild or something, and it's mostly sort of kids their own age that they're having to, get past or something like that. And I don't know, something like or just make them more reliant on stealth and kind of subtlety and that kind of thing.
And I'm kind of going with that partly because I don't really feel like writing a lot of sword fights. That seems
blah. I got you.
I'd rather kind of write daggers and knives in the dark and sneaking around and stuff, which seems more interesting to me. But at the same time, at some point, I may have to have some kind of combat, and that comes to pass. I have to stay true to the decisions I've made, and if Triss is supposed to be really good at fighting, then that's something I have to be a part of, and I don't know how to make that necessarily super realistic later on down the road in certain circumstances. Not that female characters can't be good at fighting, but again, she's a 16-year-old girl, and if she goes up against a fully grown man who's trained, that's a weird plot point to hit.
Just make all your female characters Mara Jade. You'll be fine. It's going to be great. All female characters should definitely be Mara Jade. No, not Ray. The whole point is not to be Ray. Mara Jade is the exact opposite of Ray.
I didn't read any books with Mara Jade in them.
Oh, it's right. You never did. Oh, man. I'm so sorry for you. That's like the biggest disappointment of the new Star Wars series is that Mara Jade is no part of it at all. Even
more disappointing than Luke being a crotchety old man who gave up on everything?
Yes, way more disappointing than that. Even though that is pretty disappointing as well. Let's not even get on that tangent though.
So yeah, I'm grappling with some choices about Triss, and likely the bright answer is going to end up being somewhere in the middle. Maybe she's good at thieving and does it, but her mom may not approve entirely because she wants her to do other things. And maybe Triss practices fighting but isn't like super good at it, but is better than Darren. Like maybe there's the right answer is just to kind of shoot in the middle on all these things and make a more well-rounded and not super niche character in that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, don't decide beforehand that, oh no, she definitely couldn't beat this kind of person, but also don't decide beforehand like that she would even, be necessarily the one who's the fighter,
Yeah. And maybe she's really clever and in certain circumstances can beat a superior opponent because she has these tricks up her sleeve. But maybe if she's like one-on-one with a really skilled fighter, she doesn't stand a chance. Maybe she has to kind of be in her own element to make it happen.
Yeah, and you as the writer are the one who can either put them in that situation or not put them in that situation, depending on, what needs to happen. So I wouldn't worry too much about it at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just need to decide kind of the vague lines I want to go with and then move forward in that direction, because the next chapter is going to be Darren and Warren out on the town, learning the ropes of thieving for Darren. And if Triss is going to be involved, I need to know what role she has in that
just you saying
area.
Darren and Warren on the town. I just had the image of Darren and this little 10-year-old just kind of walking around town, just like going to get a beer at the tavern or something. It's a hilarious mental image.
Oh yeah, I kind of want their relationship to be like a kind of thing like that in some ways.
Bros, yeah.
Yeah. Because that's certainly how Warren sees himself. He sees himself
totally.
as 10 feet tall.
Which I love. I love Warren so far. I can't wait.
He's my favorite character to write.
Read,
he's
read
just...
them. Yeah.
Because he could just be silly right with his writing, and it's just fun.
Yeah, I feel like those are the sorts of characters that you always kind of just pop off the page, are the ones that you just kind of let yourself go with, and they can easily be the most fun to write and probably to read as well, for sure.
Yeah, I can
even
give
yourself license to just go whatever with them.
I even let him be some pretty cliche sometimes, but I try to be original about the way he says things. But I even let him be a little bit tropey sometimes because it's just so much fun, and I don't mind it.
Yeah, especially if he's not the main character, you know.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I the more I write him, the more interwoven I want him to be with the plot, because I just want to have more of him in the book.
Totally, yeah. Well, let's go ahead and wrap things up there yet. We've so far totally messed that sentence up.
Jeez, dude.
Yeah, let's try that again. Let's go ahead and wrap things up there. We kind of had a couple more things we wanted to talk about maybe, but we'll save those for another time because we've been going for about 35 minutes here so far. We want to keep these to about half an hour each. So, yeah, any last words?
Any last words? I was trying to come up with like an insult at the end, like you chicken, but I couldn't think of anything better than you chicken, and it seemed really lame. So that'll be my last word.
Fair enough. Okay, cool. Well, thank you guys for listening. You can find us online at our Facebook page, our Instagram, our Twitter, apparently, which is still a thing, I guess. All World Builders Anonymous. World Builders Anonymous, but man, I cannot talk today.
Dude. Your words need to come out better.
Hard time. For a podcaster, I'm not very, very good at talking. WorldBuildersAnonymous.com is our website, and you can email us at oh man,
try hard, dig deep.
Info at no.
What?
It's not.
Where did you even pull that from?
I don't know. Totally
WBApodcast@gmail.com.
I was just gonna
is
say
the
that.
email address.
I was
No,
testing to see if you.
And
knew.
if you find us you can find us on Reddit. We talk a little bit on the fantasy and fantasy writers subreddits. You can find us there at WBA_podcast.
Leave us a review on iTunes.
You jumped into the plugs, and I was thrown off because it's my job.
Well, I thought I could. I thought I could try it today, and I failed miserably. So maybe I'll
leave it
to you for
you got
now.
halfway through.
Yeah, well, you know,
it was good.
50% is still an F. So you know,
you gave some effort. I'm
F
proud
for
of you.
fails.
Proud of you, dude.
Thank you. All
Finish
right.
iTunes.
Yes.
Finish it.
Oh, you said that. Yes. Leave us a review on iTunes. That's all I had to say.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
We're
Thanks for
done now.
listening. Thanks. Bye.
This show is sponsored in part by Audible. Visit worldbuildersanonymous.com/audible to check out what the guys are listening to right now and to receive a free audiobook.